Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is time for our third episode of the Summer School TV. I managed to cut it off right before the loading screen managed to finish. I'm very proud of myself for that. So we've got another packed episode of guests alongside. We've also got another fun panel coming your way as well. So one quick thing. We're going to go straight into our first guest, who's going to be joining me alongside, of course, my co-host Enrica Loria. One quick thing to announce is that we know, as a result of this online environment and the connectivity required in order to make this work, I have been warned by our top production team that there's a small chance that the Zoom call that this all runs through, that's right, kids, this is a very glorified Zoom call, could actually shut down at any moment as a result of a power cut that our producer might experience. So, in the event that happens, the fun part is, unless the power cut also happens in the UK, you're stuck with me and only me, which isn't terribly exciting. All my job is to funnel you to much more interesting people to listen to them talk. So, speaking of, without further ado, let's get to talking to some of those more interesting people. And this is all part of our third day here at the summer school, talking about AI for experience, looking at analytics of player data, modelling player behaviours and such. I've just had confirmation from the production team it's a 1% chance this is going to happen, which means that there's a 90% chance it will happen. But moving on, please give me a warm welcome, first of all, to my co-host for the evening, as always, Enrica Loria, as well as our first guest, who is Christiana Pacheco.
Hiya. Hello, everyone. Hello, Tommy.
Sorry, I kept you guys hanging in there for too long. You're like, come on, get to it. Christiana, how are you?
I'm doing well, yeah.
So
How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just really worried that you're all going to leave me.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I've committed to this
You've
now.
committed to this. You're sold. So, for everyone, please could you take a moment just to introduce yourself, I guess, to our audience. Let them know a little bit about what you've been doing and what you're all about.
Yeah, so I am basically a PhD student in my last year, finally. Um, and what I Oh, by the way, I'm doing my PhD in London, so I'm in Queen Mary University of London. And what I basically focus on is believability, so both player and character believability, and how we go about assessing it, modeling it, and yeah, that's pretty much my area.
And so you've been really kind of interested in sort of analytics about believability and sort of trying to figure out how to make agents look and act believable. Like where do you start with this sort of thing? Because a lot of the agents that we're trying to build, typically believability isn't something that we're particularly interested in.
Yeah, so that was actually one of the big issues because when I started, there wasn't so much research-wise in this. Like I've seen, you do get a lot of papers that go, we're trying to make a believable agent. We're doing from player data and everything, and that's kind of how. But when I went, okay, I'm gonna do some AI. One of the things I faced was, okay, but if I do AI, how do I evaluate it? And that started a whole process of how do you even go about any sort of evaluation. So initially it was quite basic. It was literally telling people, what do you think? Can you comment on believability on videos, rating it? And yeah, so that's how it started. And I realized it wasn't giving me as much as I was hoping for. And that's when I started introducing the methods that we actually talked about today, which was the time continuous methods. So where people actually play a game I give them, and after they annotate the entire session on the opponent's believability.
Oh, that's very interesting, and I guess it's very challenging too. One thing that pops into my mind when I think about believability, sorry about the pronunciation, is that, for instance, when you have like massively multiplayer game, often what you do when you want like to boost your game and you don't have that many players yet, you try to fill players with non-player characters, right? And yeah. I was wondering, for you, what do you think, how much do you think is important believability there for not spoiling like the multiplayer experience?
I mean, when people go to online games, some of the reasons behind that has to do with playing with other people. So if you do get believable characters, then it's going to only enhance your session, because you obviously, when games are starting out, you sometimes don't have the chances of having immediately the influx of people. And it would be quite nice to have the option of, while people are figuring out about this, here are some bots that actually behave like them, so that you can have an idea what kind of experience you can get out of those games.
And I mean, is that something that it's already existent, or at least that are we there yet to have like believable agents that act in a way, in a social environment, in a believable way?
That is a bit of an interesting question, because it depends a lot on who is playing your game. Because one of the things I've noticed in my studies is that the perception of believability varies a lot from person to person. So I would say there are some decent models out there from known games that have been praised for having really cool AI in them. And, you know, in a sense, to say, oh, this is quite believable. But at the same time, I've had friends of mine who actually look and say, oh, that wasn't so good, actually. I didn't enjoy it that much. So I guess it depends. I think the models right now are still quite like programmed, like heavily programmed, instead of any of these new techniques coming out, which is with machine learning and all of the techniques we've been talking about. But I wouldn't say there is and there isn't. I would say that to some people that definitely there are models that they consider believable and they like to play with, but to others that might be a very long, I think personally we are still quite a bit far from the ultimate believable agent. But you know, that's why I'm trying to work towards it, in hopes of maybe one of these days stumble upon it.
So I've got a bit of a selfish question about this. It's going to make sense in a second, but one of the things I find really interesting is believability is really subjective. And a lot of the work that I do on YouTube is I go out my way to try and communicate to people how the AI works in a lot of games. And one of the things I've observed, I'm actually doing a little bit of my own research on this now, is assessing how people react to it in the comments. One of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people cry wolf to me sometimes. That's the most generous way I can describe it, because sometimes I'm called very nasty things where people say it doesn't matter all this technical stuff that you're saying, either I'm lying about it or they don't believe it because they're not convinced by what they've seen when they play the game. And I think that's a really interesting thing about, like, how do you tackle, I mean, is this something you've even looked at, the idea of the technical complexity of the AI alongside the believability of it?
It is a pretty tough one, because on my very first study, what I did notice is, like, I was exactly asking people what they thought about the underlying behaviors. And funny enough, you would have precisely some saying, oh, I think this is a bot because it has very robotic movements. And other people saying, I think this is a person because it has robotic movements. Which is always a fun thing to watch. So what I did try in this last study I did was actually just collect a lot of features, the same way that we've been discussing in yoga talks. So loads of features of what actually is happening in game, and then pair that with the annotations people give me and try to find if there's any correlations between specific features and believability. I mean, this is one way I started trying to tackle it. So I started trying to see, okay, how does behavior actually pair itself well with what actually people tell me? But yeah, because what I've noticed is that when you introduce comments and more towards the free speech, where people just straight out comment, like you said on your YouTube videos, it's very hard to really pass this information and understand where they're trying to get at.
It doesn't help with the language, I think, and sometimes I mean, not just in terms of expletives, but also just the very nature of online commentary and like how people interact with one another. One last thing I wanted to kind of bring up we've got you here is so you're doing your PhD Queen Mary University of London. It's part of the IGI consortium, the Intelligent Games and Gaming Intelligence. So you did a placement as well, and that was on the project Pagia, which was between Microsoft Research and Ninja Theory over in Cambridge. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so essentially I got brought in to be a bit of a bridge between both, which was a very interesting experience to have. So I was there in the very early stages of this work where they needed something on the game side to be communicating so we could extract data and those sorts of things that you need. And so what I was doing there was actually trying to implement this so that then we could do some research with it. And it was really interesting because it kind of got me to learn a lot, both from the game development side and from the research side. And I would say, much like on the talk that we had yesterday from Model AI, where they say that there are some disconnects sometimes between both. I actually found that myself as well. And yeah, so that's it was a really fun experience because again I got brought in to just sort of work with both, and it was always fun to kind of try to commit to do stuff that both wanted but working, because obviously the goals were a bit different on both sides, and that does give you some challenges for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Enrica. I thought you were going to raise a question there.
I thought that you made a movement, and basically our production team said that we were cutting off each other, mostly me. So I didn't want to do that. So sorry. I mean, those projects sounds super interesting, and I'm still thinking about the believability thing, and that's something that I definitely will look into it a little bit more. And how about the summer school experience up to now? So what did you like? I mean, I think you participated also in the other one back in Kenya, right?
Yeah, so I was in the very first one. And it did spark some ideas, especially when I started hearing about the play modeling, because that's actually how I got into, as I said, the latest study that I did, because I was going along more the how do we assess believability, and it was interesting to see that with an effective computing, you have all of these tools and all of these things that people have been doing with emotion, with arousal, all of that, and no one has really ever tried to also do this with a believability state quite basic in that sense, where it's just usually just the questionnaires, the typical, is this believable, is this not believable? And it's just it's places events like these that give us, I think, some of the best ideas on what to do with the stuff that we have. They can be very, very inspirational, I think. So it was really nice to attend again now that I have even more work done and get even more ideas into what I can possibly do with my work. And I was trying to tip into the ideas of the AI. Since I have all of this data and all of these annotations, I actually thought this would be a pretty cool idea to implement those set annotations, like Yorgos mentioned, even in a reinforcement learning algorithm or something. So yeah, it's just it's basically a place for me to get lots of ideas and get lots of contacts for my hopeful getting a job after my PhD. and yeah, I meet a lot of different people, really.
It's always the concern, right? You're like, oh, this is going great, we're nearly done. Oh, then what? I need to get paid. So, I'm sure you'll be fine. I think the work you've been doing is really, really exciting. Definitely looking forward to seeing more from yourself in the coming years. But we'll wrap it up for now. Christiana, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you.
And look forward to chatting to you again soon.
You too.
So a quick shout. I've put a link for you over in the chat right now. So if you're wanting to know a little bit more about the work, particularly on Project Pagia, which was this collaboration between Microsoft Research and Ninja Theory, at the Microsoft AI and Games Research Summit, Sam Devlin and Raluca Georgescu gave a talk about this just a couple of months ago. So I've put a link to the session where that ran. Funnily enough, I was also the chair of that session, it's just entirely coincidental. This is just me. I seem to just pop up everywhere. But anyway, let's get on to more interesting people than me. So we've got another guest. We've got a couple more guests for you. But the next one, this is really exciting. I'm really excited to have a chat with our next guest to find out a bit more about the range of research that they've been involved in. Please give a warm welcome to Brianna McHorse. Oh, wrong one. Brianna, how you doing? That's twice I've done
I'm
that.
good. How are you?
I'm good. I've managed to so far twice get that transition wrong. So I'm waiting for the top production team to tell me off. Other than that, it's all good. It's all good. So Brianna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I work as a machine learning engineer at a company called Hidden Door, where we're building interactive narrative games for kids. So like text games. I have a PhD in evolutionary biology, which is totally unrelated. I studied why horses have one toe. So it's not exactly what you would call evolutionary algorithms in terms of game AI, but there are some related concepts.
I mean, that calls for the next question. Like, what brought you to games and AI? And
Data. So it turns out that in a lot of science PhDs these days, you spend a bunch of time programming and analyzing data, which I thought was great. It was my favorite thing. It was really fun. So after I graduated, I went into data science and discovered that I really loved the engineering aspects of it. And so that brought me to machine learning engineering, which is where I am now. I just happen to be at a game company, which is pretty exciting. I'm a huge video gamer. I play D&D, so it's a really good fit.
cool. Yeah, and I mean, just before that, we were talking, of course, still staying like in computer science and all, about the power of merging two different things. Like in that case, it was AI with maybe assessment for believability. Do you manage to bring your like old job in the new one?
Not in detail. It turns out that a PhD in evolutionary biology is great for party facts. I can tell you lots of really interesting things about a bunch of different random animals.
But we need to have you in the green room like after the session because
I'll just hang out.
Just tell us a whole bunch of stuff. I'm super jazzed to hear more about this.
I'll do that. But the broader elements, thinking scientifically, knowing how to set up experiments, being able to quickly research a broad area and bring information from a bunch of different fields to bear on the thing I'm working on, that all definitely I still do.
Like one of the things I thought was really interesting seeing like the work at Hidden Door is, working on engineering these narrative-based games, working a lot in kind of natural language processing and tools and what have you, but you're focusing very specifically on children and building games for younger audiences, and that strikes me as a real challenge. In fact, I went away and did a bit of reading, and in fact, I noticed that even Hidden Door had talked a little bit about this on blogs on their site about mitigating risk and actually ensuring that this is safe and accessible to children. Like, where do you start with that? It strikes me that there's so many different axes from which their issues could arise, particularly when building products like this specifically for children.
Yeah, there are many, many sources of peril in doing this. So it's basically involves building a large, complex, but highly controllable and responsive system, right? So it's not just a single language model like GPT-3. It's an entire infrastructure around words and language that both generates the game environment and draws from it. So it's really building out a whole custom system that allows us to have that level of control and safety for the target audience.
Gotcha, and that strikes me as well that the sources you're pulling from as well, that you want to kind of validate that or vet that a little bit more, so it's more safe and more accessible. Like, I mean, there was even reference today about toxic behavior within gaming communities, and even in other sources, whether it's from over in social media or whatever else. So trying to find ways to mitigate against that, because there's even still going to be valuable information you can pull from those areas, from those sources that you're just trying to kind of steer around, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Data isn't the only source of bias that can come out of language models, but it is a major one. So that's something we're really aware of. It involves a lot of domain-specific data sources, a lot of bootstrapping our own sources of data. One of the things that we really care about is telling stories that everyone can see themselves in. And that means not just focusing on classic D&D style Euro swords and sorcery, right? We want to tell a lot of different kinds of stories. And sometimes that means seeking out expertise and training data from people who really know what they're doing.
In terms of what you're doing in your work and the summer school, is there that maybe inspired you for next steps or that you've been enjoying particularly so far?
I really resonated. There was a talk yesterday about procedural content generation, and just thinking about all of the ways that PCG can really improve a game and the player experience, right? It lets us create these infinite, adaptive, replayable games. It lets us augment human creativity in a way that I'm really excited about. So it was very cool to see other ways that people are using PCG to broaden what they can build and who they can build for. I've really been enjoying that. Also, anything having to do with AI playing video games is pretty cool. When I was teaching in grad school, my students introduced me to this game called QWOP. Have you ever? Yeah, so for those who are watching who don't know, it's a Flash game where you literally press the keys Q, W, and O, and P to try to make an avatar run. It's horrifically awkward and impossible to do. And I've always wanted to train an AI to play it so that I could win. So maybe with the information that I've learned this week, I can finally go try that.
I've just stuck the link to QWOP in the chat for anyone who's not played it. It's one of Bennett Foddy's earlier games. I do recall. I think I saw maybe someone tried to train an AI on that.
I'm sure someone
entirely
has.
Just on the visual output. I remember myself and a colleague threatening to do it at one point. But,
it's a very frustrating game.
I know. But yeah, maybe another time. We're gonna have to wrap up for now. But Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hopefully, we can find out more about evolutionary PhDs and analysing data from horse fossils at another time.
Sounds great.
Cheers. Thank you. There we go. That's second guest, Brianna McHorse. Thank you so much for joining us. So already pretty stacked guest list. I'm just excited. Every one of the guests we've got in today is just, you do something that's really cool and quite interesting. So we've got one more guest, and then after that we're going to jump over to, we're going to run a quick panel. I say pick quick. It's going to be a panel. We're going to have two of our speakers from earlier today, Luke Dickin and David Melhart, are going to join us to talk about game analytics a little bit. But before that, let's get on to our third guest of the evening. I'm going to get this transition right, I swear to God. So please give a warm welcome to Karina Meath.
Meat.
Sorry,
meat.
I knew I was going to butcher that. I am so sorry.
Yeah, it's difficult with the TH. Everyone thinks... Yeah, no problem.
There we go. I'll take the blame for that. Karina, please tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of share what you've been up to with the audience.
Of course. I'm Karina. I'm from Germany. I studied electrical engineering and specialized in control engineering and optimization. And after my studies, I started a PhD in the industry, focusing on data analytics, and it was all concerned about data from indoor localization systems and how we could use that for simulation of manufacturing systems. And I became the project lead for the manufacturing simulation and digital twin project, where we also thought about how could we use things from the game industry to enhance our digital twin experience. And that's also why I stumbled upon this game and AI summer school and decided, okay, I want to learn more about this field and joined.
That's actually very interesting. You probably have a very different background from many of our attendees at the summer school. Do you want to tell a little bit how you actually think to integrate what you've learned in the summer school in your work, and maybe a little bit also what digital twins are, just like a sentence?
Yeah, of course. So for me, the digital twin is a virtual representation of an asset that exists in the real world. So in our case, we have a manufacturing plant, and we have a simulation model that reflects the real world. And this is all connected with data flow. So we use data from the real world to adapt the simulation. And also we use the simulation to perform experiments and to optimize the real system. And what I want to take back to my work from the summer school is, for example, that the game world is somehow thinking of the users of the system like somebody that needs to be engaged with the system. And that's a really nice perspective that is very beneficial in developing any piece of software, because if you don't think about the user in the end, you come up with a solution that is not used properly. And of course, we are very interested in using our virtual digital twins as a test bed, and also to generate and augment data that is missing somehow in the real environment about, for example, people that are working there. And if we can use these as test beds to generate insights on processes, it's really great. And also, somehow to, what was the other thing I said? About using this as a playground for AI development. So we can use it to test what we learned and trained. Like if we have a model, we can deploy it in the digital world. And if it is suitable or performs well, we can transfer it to the real world without crashing everything in real world first.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, that's very, in a way, refreshing, because it's a very different way at looking at the topic, at AI and games, in something that it's in the real world, and maybe for somebody is completely unrelated to games, right? And so what brought you to games, like besides engagement? What's that make you like, if there is anything else?
Of course.
Yeah,
there are different things. So when I started working in the industry, I came from the research and the university, and I always thought like, okay, always numbers and values are the best and important things that I have to came up with to describe a problem. But if you then go to management, you always have to come up with like good visualization. And the best visualization of a manufacturing process is to have a real digital twin of this process and to show this to a customer or to the management. And so one insight from my first years in the industry was that it's really, really important to have a good looking view on these manufacturing plants to understand what's going on. And from the game world, we know that these engines are very powerful. They are able to give you a photorealistic view of what your environment is. And we want to take this platforms and engines as like the power that they offer to enhance our view. So that was the first thing that brought me to the engines. And then I also thought about, okay, when game designers develop something, they can just push it out there, and there are millions of players out there that can play, and they solve how they get back their data and can analyze that. And so there's always there's a system in place that works. So why shouldn't we use this for our use case as well? And so that's why I'm very interested in how you guys do all this deployment and development, and maybe we can just transfer it to another industry and create some benefits in our domain as well.
Cool. That's very cool, really. And again, a lot of different angles that also makes us think of the value that we have in games and how much they can be actually versatile and used in so many different contexts. And well, concerning the school again, how's your game jam project going? Do you want to like spoil a little bit what you're doing?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. So the game jam project, Metal Tetris, it's called, is all about an optimization problem where we want to put metal parts onto a sheet. And we have to be very efficient doing this because we want to save material because it's expensive, and we also want to be fast in the production. So that's like the real world optimization problem. And I think it's very funny because it's similar to a puzzle and people love puzzles. And so I always thought back in the office, like, okay, this could be very fun to have a game implemented just for relaxing and putting the shapes there. And so, yeah, I thought, why not putting this as a challenge into the Game AI Jam? And yeah, we're now at a stage where we came up with the first MVP, and we are able to drag and drop certain parts onto a board. And yeah, now we are setting up our reinforcement learning policy and we have thought about the actions that we have, like flipping parts, rotating them, and where to put them, and also like choosing which one to place and stuff like this. So it's still a work in progress, but I'm really looking forward to the results at the end of the week. So
yeah, I'm very much looking forward your project.
Absolutely, that sounds really cool. Looking forward to checking out all of them at the end of the week, but definitely going to keep an eye out for that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Karina. This has been really interesting. Hopefully we'll get to catch up with you a little bit more throughout the week and maybe chat a little bit over in the Discord, or
yeah, sure,
even in the green. You might stick around. We might get more interesting facts maybe in the green room afterwards. Who knows? Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Bye bye.
And back. That was Karina Meat. My sincere apologies for managing to get the pronounce. I've been working very hard on my pronunciations, but absolutely wonderful. What's been really cool is we've had a really interesting set of guests today, all of whom are doing very different things, coming from very different backgrounds as well. And what's really cool about that, and one of the things I really like about that, is particularly seeing the people come into the summer school, is that we're getting people from all different walks of life. And particularly for someone like myself, because I've been, myself and people like Julian and Yorgos, we've been in the community now for quite a while. And so as a result, you're kind of used to seeing a lot of the same faces at particular events. So it's always great to get to meet new people who are coming in, get an idea on their perspectives and see what they're up to. And also just like what drives them. Digital twins is really exciting. I've seen some very cool work. I can't talk a lot about this because I did actually maybe have a chat with someone about this on digital twins for games. One of the things, there was companies that are now looking at actually doing these digital twins from like film and TV productions. That way they've actually got them ready in game engines and stuff like that. But that's a whole other thing for later on. Let's get cracking, because we've still got our final entry of the evening. We've still got our panel. And so what we managed to do was we managed to drag two of the speakers from today kicking and screaming. Depending on the faces there on the screen, like one of them's like, I think you did kind of kick us and drag us, and the other one's like, yeah, well, maybe it's fine. So please give a warm welcome, first of all, to Luke Dickin, as well as David Melhart. David is actually getting his one moment in the spotlight, because David's actually part of the production team, and we just kind of keep him stuffed at the back. But we let you out today. How you feeling?
Yeah, I feel like I'm doing everything.
So you're on your best behaviour, because you get about 25 minutes, and if any nonsense, you're going back in the back.
Back in the pit.
But yeah, Luke, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
Are you feeling a bit more awake? I believe it was quite early when we had you on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really grateful to David, actually, because I was initially scheduled to be speaking at 5 a.m. my time. And I was like, could we not do that, please? So they got me up at 6:30 instead. So yeah. Moral of the story is check what time zone the conference is running at before you agree to.
I've made this mistake so many times this week because the event is time zone for CEST and I'm in BST. So the amount of times where I'm like, oh yeah, like the first session isn't for another hour. No, it started 2 minutes ago. And then you'll just see me like, so if anyone's been going to all the events and you just see me pop up like 2-3 minutes late, that's why. Every day without fail, I've managed to get the times wrong.
It's nice you've got your excuse all pre-canned like that. It's good.
I've got to, I'm a man of the internet, so I need to have my apologies canned and ready to go. But anyway, enough about me. Let's talk game analytics. And so both of you I think gave really interesting talks today. Luke, you were doing this kind of introductory overview and like kind of getting started in modeling behaviors and trying to capture information. And then David, you were kind of talking about a large suite of work. Well, not just yourself, of course, because you were talking alongside Ahmad about a variety of different projects that were happening over at Ubisoft. So trying to find a good question to get the ball rolling. And I think actually this ties into something that Luke mentioned earlier, that player modeling, I think, can often be done in a very kind of superficial manner. And you end up running yourself into situations where you're just going to generate the thing that you already anticipate by virtue of that. Like, what practices would you strongly advise, particularly for newcomers, against doing when it coming to modeling data from players? How about Luke? Maybe ask yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that you've got to be aware of is you've got to effectively log what interventions you've made, because that at least allows you to unwind what's going on and why. So for example, going back a few years, and let's just talk about like propensity modeling. So we're going to train a model on live data around whether people are likely to churn. And based on that model and that likelihood, we might then do something different with those people. But then we have those people continuing to play the game, despite the fact that they were likely to churn, but they would have churned unless we'd done the intervention. So then you get this kind of like, almost like a paradox in your data. And you have to be really careful of like making sure that you're tracking what you did so that you're able to like effectively account for it and normalize for it as you kind of feed in the training data, because otherwise you get this just hellish kind of like, I've not watched this week's Loki, but I imagine it's the same kind of multiverse diversity splitting of like craziness.
I did actually watch it the first thing this morning. That way I'd got it out the way.
Well, so I would have done, but I was talking to you guys instead. That's where
I know. That's time zones. The worst. No spoilers.
But yeah, I mean, it becomes a pain in the ass, because the other thing is, if you're not doing that logging, then you end up like trying to train effectively on top of a sponge. And that was actually one of the first projects that I had to take on at Zynga when I joined 7 years ago now, was trying to do machine learning on the top of a system that was a black box and did not log anything. And in the end, I was just like, how about we just don't? For the first couple of years, there was a lot of my career that was like, no, that's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that.
About logging, no, that's what mostly was your talk was about, like tracking data. Some people believe that the most you track, the better. Are you of the same opinion? I mean, even when you have like such a high dimensional data, or what do you do if you have to prioritize?
So I am definitely track all the things. It's interesting, right? Because you end up in a world where if you need to track something and you're not actually tracking it already, then you end up with like almost like a cold start problem, where you effectively have to like wire the thing up, put it through QA, put it through submission, get it into the player base. And you could be looking at like a month delay from wanting to track it to actually getting that telemetry hitting the database. One of our internal core values is we call it Zynga speed. And in the old days, Zynga speed meant 50 releases per game per day on like Facebook, and everybody crunching real hard. Now Zynga speed is a little bit of a punchline that we use internally. But certainly when you've got like a month lead time on data, like that's a problem. So one of the things that we try and do is we over instrument and then we selectively throw stuff on the floor, which at least means that we can pick it up fast if we need to. So one of the things that we look to for inspiration is actually, and this is one of the few times this will ever fall out my face, we're looking at Tesla as an inspiration. So Tesla does a lot of really interesting stuff around this, where the extent of logging that they do on device is extensive. Like they are logging everything and they're doing it locally. And then when they get to a place where they are interested in a new thing, they're able to effectively like query and data transfer from device to backend. So all the Tesla cameras are like recording and storing locally. And for the most part, that's great because you just kind of keep it around in like cold storage, but your cold storage consumer side. And then if you ever want like, hey, I want something that looks like this, you're able to actually run that again. You like run that on the car, as I understand it, and the car is like, yeah, I saw a deer once. Let me send you all the frames of video of a deer that, or whatever. And that's a really interesting way of solving the problem. But certainly over instrument, and you know, the big corporate answer is like just log all the things and don't worry about it, because we're already spending so much money on cloud storage and stuff that doesn't matter.
Like
I think we have the same sort of approach, and that's what we usually want to do. Just like have everything, and then be prepared to anything. But usually, like the problems we run into at model that we do a lot of the times, we want to do time continuous predictions. So the whole data size will just blow up like crazy. And if you can, in some cases, what helped us a lot is to deal with non-stochastic games, because then you can just basically record like a subset, like just the input space, what coming from the player, and then you can essentially just recreate all the games that have been played. So there can be tricks where you can sort of like limit the amount of incoming information, because what you find when you move from the academia into the industry is that it works amazingly in academia when you have 20 players in a small scale study, but then it breaks down super fast when you have 20,000 new players on the first day of an app.
Because I was thinking about this, particularly going back to the question that we originally raised to Luke about, you know, high dimensional data, prioritizing which information to track, and going to particularly David, like your work with Ahmad as well, and Alessandro over at Ubisoft, like you're dealing with games like The Division, which have a huge amount of data that I know they already pull down, but also when you distill those games down to their purest essence, they're actually, when you abstract them, they're actually quite straightforward. So was that like a process for you to start thinking about what information you wanted to track? It's like, well, the moment-to-moment gameplay we're maybe not as interested in, but the more higher level, like missions they're executing and completing and stuff like that, and how they're, maybe what particular loadouts or configurations they're using, did that become more of the focus?
I think there's also sort of like we see the beginning of this kind of like time continuous modeling becoming more and more feasible. So we also have to find sort of the space for it in a design process and what we can offer, right? So when we first started, a lot of the times, like the designers don't know what they really want because they haven't seen time continuous predictions. So we had to work with designers to actually select stuff that they want. They want to predict how the game progresses or how players are, for example, engaged. Like engagement prediction is one thing that is very good for time continuous prediction. And as you say, like other stuff, it's much more straightforward to just collapse one gameplay session into one data point and then say, like, in this gameplay session, this and these people felt more connected to the game or more competent in the game than other players.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, one question that I was thinking about is related to the fact that we're seeing more and more temporal data analysis, so that you just don't take all the aggregated data and just run things on that. But are there any cases in your experience in which aggregated data are better to be used instead of temporal data that of course comes with a lot of computational complexity and all of that? Maybe David?
I don't know if it's always about the computational complexity. It's also more about like procedures in place, and traditional data analysis usually looked at more aggregated data. So the whole strategy of market research and traditional analytics looking at this data. So this is the data we have to sort of give to them, because they also have to figure out what they can do with the time continuous prediction, right? So it's sort of like a dialogue between us, the researchers and research department, and the companies we work with, to figure out what is the exact value that we can give to them. So I think I don't know if there's a straightforward answer to this, that this should be time continuous and this should be aggregated. But I guess like when we look at motivation, for example, it doesn't really make sense to do something as time continuous motivation, because for one, you can't really query people on time continuous motivation. So you will have like bigger chunks. Well, you played 3 games, you get a questionnaire, and we try to like connect these 3 games into your questionnaire answers, right? And we try to build a model between those. And I don't know if we can build a system where it is feasible or even wise to have something that changes so fast.
So I would push back on that fairly hard, actually. Like for me, the temporal analysis matters anytime that you need like localized context. And as a result, like for me, motivation requires temporal understanding. Like the sequence of events is so key. And this is actually an area that we're actively pursuing with graph databases, and actually kind of framing a lot of stuff as like so like the player journey and the player experience framed as like transitioned through states over time. Whereas when we do something like playstyle analysis, you can do that as an aggregate. And for the kinds of games that we're working with, it's also a little bit easier to aggregate because it's very puzzly, very well behaved. Word-based games in particular tend to lend themselves to like, well, okay, like what's your coverage of vocabulary? And that's something that we can kind of roll up at an aggregate level. But certainly from a kind of experiential point of view, like my kind of the way that we think about that is very kind of contextual and temporal.
But when you talk about like temporality, like what's the unit of your measurements there?
State transitions.
Okay.
And kind of state transitions at a fairly macro kind of so like almost like UI transitions.
I see.
So I mean, when you and this kind of again, it's a little bit skewed because we are a puzzle game rather than an open world game. But like if I come into the game, pop open the daily challenges screen, close it up, open the shop, close it up, go to a level, then that tells me something about like my motivational journey versus like I come in, I open up the leaderboard, I immediately jump into somewhere where I'm behind. Like you can kind of infer motivation by like the sequence of events from that.
Yeah.
But you need, it's the sequence that matters. Because if I came in, played a level, leaderboarded, that is a different kind of behavior than come in, leaderboard, play a level.
Oh yeah. No, I actually completely agree with that. It's when I'm talking about time continuous measurements, we usually use like 1 to 3 second time windows, over like an actual gameplay session. So we usually, the system we use for it to measure motivation was this Ubisoft player experience questionnaire that is based on self-determination. So it was a bit more abstract, and we went into it and we were like trying to figure out how to do this time continuously to follow this sort of like, because we usually looked at action games, and there it was like very hard to implement something that measures it like at a 3-second interval, or even like
there's a reason
smaller
that we
intervals.
focused on puzzle games, and it's because a lot of those complexities kind of just drop away.
Just disappear.
Yeah, maybe we should focus more on puzzle games.
I really loved this exchange there. I have another question. Sorry, Tommy, for taking over.
Please take it away.
That's more into like, I mean, probably who watched the show kind of noticed that I pop the social component here and there. I mean, it's not really because I'm researching on it, but yeah, that's why. And my question here is, how do you think that modeling social experience complicate things in the way that we're doing player modeling now? And what are the challenges there?
So my glib answer is go play Spell Forest and see how much social there is in that one. And again, for the same reason, like, hey, that sounds really hard. Let's not do that. But I think you probably have a lot more experience here, David, given the types of games you're involved in.
Yeah, we actually were looking into like had some ideas around experience modeling and integrations with platforms that a lot of players like looking at the game themselves. And then I think it's not necessarily like in those cases, it's not necessarily something that holds us back, but sort of like a new area of interest that we can also tie into the games, right? Like we can look at how people consume streams on Twitch or other platforms. We can also look at how people use big platforms that a lot of companies put out and try to turn into their own social platforms, right? Like we know that all the big companies have like Origin and Uplay and Steam, and every bit of these systems have social systems integrated. And I think that could be like a very interesting challenge and a very rich source of data to look at how people interface with these systems. And as Luke said before, like look at the sequence of actions before and after the games, like how they go into a game, how they come in off a game, and how people interact with different streams and streamers. We had this sort of demo made earlier, I think last year, with Model AI that looked at time continuous engagement prediction for Twitch streams that can, for example, highlight the most interesting part of Twitch streams and sort of like direct people to streams and snippets that can be more interesting to drive engagement more.
I mean, actually, this is pretty good because as we're driving towards conclusion for the session. One of the things I did want to ask both of you is like, what's the next big idea or thing that you have a very strong interest in, kind of emerging within the analytics field? And I did want to actually briefly talk about, David, like this was mentioned already, about the work that you'd been doing on streamers and kind of streamer engagement and things like that. And that seems like your area of interest, certainly. Like that seems like a whole other avenue that hasn't really been explored yet. This idea of the relationships, parasocial relationships, even between the audience and the streamer, and like what you can learn from that.
Yes, and also I think this idea of treating the game and the game's sort of like whole environment or infrastructure as one unit. So it's not just about I'm playing this game and then we look at a play session, but we look at the people from the moment they open their computer and they go into their, I don't know, Uplay or Origin or Steam, and how they interact with that system and what games they play in what sequence. I think that gives us a more interesting, like, macro level of the actual consumption of the game, because I think it's a lot of the times analytics focuses on smaller chunks, right? We focus on one game, or even like, especially when we model something in a time continuous manner, just one session, right? We don't even talk about in action games. A lot of the times we don't even talk about I started the game. It's just about this one session. So, and I think like,
and where
zooming
were
out
you before
and-
you started that? You know, like
Yeah.
what's the, you know, you're jumping from, I don't know, I'm just thinking of my Switch, like Yoshi's Crafted World to Monster Hunter Rise. And then what happens in those experiences. Those are both great games, by the way, just saying. And yeah, like going through that, and what does it mean to actually go through that at a certain point in time? Like, I think that sounds super cool. Luke, what about yourself? Like any big game changers you think on the horizon, something that's got you excited or will keep you busy at least?
I mean, I'm a little bit the wrong person. I'm here giving the analytics point of view, but I'm not working on analytics anymore. I mean, the move to this applied AI team 2 years ago and kind of founding like the Blue Sky R&D group at Zynga has kind of allowed us to pivot back towards more interesting things. And it's actually like, Tommy, it's the stuff that I've been talking about for the last fucking 10 years. You've heard me bang on about this idea of like digital dungeon master and kind of how much in general can be then. And I mean, this summer school is fantastic simply because of its focus, because it's not all looking NPCs and behavior trees and like, oh look, we're using cover slightly smarter.
I think we've only mentioned behavior trees. I think that might only be the second time. So
I mean, well, I can't believe that I'm 50% of the bringing it up. But the point is that, like, for me, it's more about, you know, analytics is knowing what's happening and gaining that insight. But the really interesting stuff is how you use that to go forwards. And, you know, I've been saying for 10 years to anybody who'll listen that kind of modeling the tabletop experience is the right thing to do. And if we could kind of package an intelligence, like a human intelligence, into our games to manage them and manage what that experience looks like, and, you know, from a narrative point of view, from a ruling, from a encounter design, you know, across the entire gamut of what a dungeon master would do at a D&D table, that's how you win. And we're still a ways off, but like, it's really interesting to see how many of the pieces are starting to fall into place. And then, like, you know, the commoditization of analytics is kind of making it such that there's off-the-shelf stuff for a lot of these things. Or I say off-the-shelf. What I really mean is like cloud services that you can Lego brick together to get you where you need to be.
Yeah, there's like a democratization to this that just wasn't there even 2-3 years ago.
I mean, you know, you think back to us going through our programs, and like AWS, I think existed back then, but we weren't using it. Like, you know, we didn't have that kind of compute power at our fingertips. We had to stitch anything we wanted together. I mean, I remember trying to set up virtual machines on my laptop, and these days you can get a Docker instance up and running and have it in the cloud and infinitely scaling within about half an hour. So yeah, so more cool shit coming, but it's all going to be in different directions, I think.
We could stick that in the poster, I think, for next year's summer school. More cool shit coming. David,
as long as you attribute the quote.
Oh yeah, of course. Cite my sources. You know, come on, got to do my job. Look, David, thanks so much for joining us. This has been awesome. It's been really great to chat to you both. And we'll catch you both very soon. Actually, David, well, I'll talk to you later anyway, because you're part of the production team. But we'll definitely catch up with you both later on.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, guys. All right, there we go. That was a good panel. I enjoyed that. Everyone was happily chatting away. Plenty of opinions to go, and plenty of discourse between our panelists as well. So I'm going to bounce back over to Enrica. There we go. We've wrapped it up.
Yeah. And another one is done.
Another one is done. We say that like, oh God, another one is done.
No, it's like happy face.
Yep. That's three down, two to go. Speaking of, we should probably talk a little bit about what's coming up next, because we have one more. So the next episode is our last one where it's focused on our speakers from the summer school as well as our guests, because we're going to do a kind of Friday wrap up with the bosses. We're going to let Chief number 1 and 2 on the show. We're going to talk a bit more to the production team. We're also going to check out the game jam. But yes, tomorrow's looking quite exciting. We've already got a bunch of guests lined up. We actually have a bumper guest set up, if I remember correctly. We have more people on tomorrow than we did today.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's almost on par with yesterday.
Yeah, it is.
But,
and tomorrow could be about play testing, right?
Yes, it's all about play testing. And I'm really excited by the talks we've got coming up tomorrow. Particularly, I've seen Sahara Sadi talking from King, talking about this work previously, I think back at FDG last year. But I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the work at Model on Glitch Finder, as well as Benedict Wilkins and Daniel Hernandez from Sony Interactive Entertainment. And of course, don't forget, Nick Walton's going to be here talking about massive language models and AI Dungeon and things of that ilk. So it's going to be a good day. And then hopefully a good episode of Summer School afterwards. Yeah? Yeah, seems reasonable. All right. With that, we'll wrap it up for the evening. We hope you all have had a wonderful day and you can go and put your feet up. Maybe you've got some extra thoughts to noodle over. Maybe you just need dinner. Maybe you're going to go and crack on with that game jam game. So, Enrica, thank you very much for steering me through and being a wonderful co-host for the evening. And thank you, of course, to all of our guests, to Christiana, to Brianna, Karina, and Luke and David, of course. And oh, last but not least, because David's already got a shout out, so we got to say thank you, of course, to Antonius, who's at the back, telling me to hurry up and end this stream just repeatedly in the Discord right now. He's just like, just get it done, just turn it off, shut up. But of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening to us babble. We'll see you again tomorrow night for another episode of Summer School TV, and we hope you all have a good one. Take care.
Bye.
Woo!